Peacock. He's on. Put him on because he's going to talk about referendum and some of the funny ones from the past and here at Ipswich. G'day, Harold.
Yeah, good morning, Danny. Happy referendum day, but there's been a heap of them in the past.
Mate, but you know what I did when I was talking to the old seniors the other day? I picked up a reserve sign. I said to the bloke, I said, geez, you've got a lot of your relatives here today. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, reserved. There's reserved over there. Reserved. You get it? Reserved? Name?
Yeah. Look, I sit at that desk all the time.
You're a funny man.
Unreservedly get kicked out of the room.
You're a funny man. You didn't get the gag, but anyhow, that's all right. I was very risque too. I was a bit naughty. Bloke turned up with baggy pants. I said, be very careful of him, girls.
What was that?
Work it out for yourself. Anyhow, let's talk to Harold about referenda.
Yeah, look, I'll go back to 1899. I'll start there because that was the Federation referendum to decide if Australia, with all the colonies come together, if Australia ever happened. And, of course, it did. But there was some other history made here in Ipswich. Now, what was termed as a telephone instrument was temporarily set up at the newspaper office here. And the results of the referendum were called directly through to here from Brisbane. Now, this was the first time that a telephone was used to phone in the result, and the crowd massed outside the office to hear the outcome. But it should be noted, Danny, that a gang of men was still working hard, stretching the wires for the telephone to make it work right up to the announcement. So history happened, but it almost didn't in 1899.
1899.
Yeah, but the events surrounding the 1917 referendum are probably the best known of all. It was the second referendum for conscription during the First World War, and it happened not far away at Warwick. That's where the Australian Prime Minister, Billy Hughes, stepped onto the platform of the Warwick railway station and into the middle of a howling mob.
Yes.
An egg was thrown, which knocked off his hat, and pandemonium broke out. It was rumoured that a Queensland policeman refused to arrest the perpetrator.
Correct.
And that's what led to the founding of the Australian Federal Police.
True story.
And that was in 1917.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And then another story, the 1951 referendum was to give the government powers to ban the Communist Party.
Right.
Now, a furor broke out here in Ipswich on the day of the voting.
Right.
Now, pencils were issued to polling clerks at the town hall, and a number of them were marked made in the USSR, made in Russia, the communist Russia. And these pencils were mixed up with the standard ones that were branded Commonwealth of Australia. Now, this communist infiltration caused a huge amount of controversy. The chief electoral officer had no idea how the pencils got there. His only explanation was that they were old stock. Now, the matter was finally settled when one of the polling clerks noted that at least they weren't red pencils. And so the referendum in Ipswich in 1951 was able to go ahead as planned. But then the most dramatic referendum in the history of the Ipswich district was not a federal one, but rather a local referendum called by the old Normanby Shire Council in 1938.
Right.
That referendum was to decide whether the Shire should buy a grader. Big issue back in 1938 at Normanby, because the council, it was based in Harrisville, just south of Ipswich, but the council was actually abolished in 1949. And the referendum might have had something to do with it. You see, there were three councillors. Three of the councillors were Hans Jensen, John Hayes, and William Sefton. Now, Hans Jensen, he'd previously been kicked by a horse and sustained severe injuries to his loins. On another occasion, his horse and sulky bolted. He grabbed the reins and was dragged for over 50 metres. Fortunately, Hans survived both these injuries to take his place in council. And, of course, there was John Hayes. He would be a councillor for over 20 years. And at the time of the Grader referendum, his brother was a Shire chairman.
Right.
And then there was William Sefton. I'll tell you more about him in a moment. But not long before the great Grader debate, two councillors who were both justices of the peace, they were principal players in a police court action. It was alleged by John Hayes that after discussing council business, he was punched in the face and kicked in the nose by William Sefton in a dispute that continued out into the main street of Harrisville. Now, Hayes suffered a compound fracture of the nose in this council business, but the witnesses available weren't sufficient to convict Sefton, who, it should be noted, he actually had form in this regard about aggressive behaviour. But anyway, in any case, the greater referendum did get up by a majority of 200 votes. And after a vote of 8-1, the Shire's first ever grader was named as Norman Bazley. Now, coincidentally, Bazley was a business partner of a former long-standing Shire chairman. So maybe Bazley benefited from a bit of favouritism to get the grader. But the councillor Sefton went on to be elected Shire chairman. In fact, he was the last chairman of the council because when he got up, the state government abolished it entirely. The Shire was gone. So maybe it was the greater referendum that caused the abolition, or maybe it was the councillors themselves. But Danny, even with the historic telephone of the 1899 referendum, the thrown egg in 1917, and the communist pencils in Ipswich in 1951, it's still the greater referendum of 1938. It stands out in my mind. I don't know about you, but the graders, that's an important issue. It should be decided like that all the time, shouldn't it?
Oh, why not?